Dr. Kellen Vex woke up to the delightful sensation of his face being smashed into a steel floor. Nothing like starting your day with a concussion, he thought, as he peeled his cheek from the cold surface and tried to recall if he'd insulted any particularly vengeful AI lately. Last he checked, he was aboard the Shamble, a rust bucket of a ship captained by a man with a peg leg and a penchant for losing at poker. Now he was here, wherever here was. Unless this was the Shamble's unique method of hospitality. Welcome to the Galactic Arena. A voice boomed with all the enthusiasm of a funeral director announcing a sale on caskets. Please remain calm while we process your arrival. Calm? Sure, Vex croaked, rubbing the growing lump on his forehead. Just let me finish my nap on the world's least comfortable mattress. Kellen was many things, biotechnologist, caffeine addict, and prolific loser of keys, but Gladiator wasn't high on his CV. He surveyed his surroundings. The room was a cell, spacious by prison standards, with walls so white they hurt to look at. The only door was a seamless slab, probably blast-proof, because who didn't love a good explosion when things got dull? You're not dead. A voice chimed in behind him, dripping with the kind of cheer that made you want to stab someone with a spoon. Vex turned to find a humanoid figure leaning against the wall, tall, spindly, with skin that had never met a sun lamp it didn't like, and eyes so bright they could double as spotlights. Name Svala, the figure said, not bothering to extend a hand. I manage new arrivals. Congratulations on your abduction. Really, Vex said, eyebrows creaking upwards. I thought this was one of those intergalactic airbeam gimmicks, experience life as a prisoner of war. Svala's lips quirked upward, a rare acknowledgement of humor. Your sarcasm's noted. Keep it handy, you'll need it. Vex adjusted his glasses, trying to size up his new best friend. So why am I here? Wrong place, wrong time, or just the universe's idea of a joke? You, my friend, are the universe's favorite joke, Svala said, nodding sagely. But lucky you, there's a trial coming up. All the races gather, they talk, they fight, they decide who gets what resources. It's like a galactic family reunion with slightly less bloodshed. And what do I have to do with it? Vex asked, hoping his role didn't involve becoming a splatter on the arena floor. Svala grinned, revealing teeth that probably doubled as a can opener. You're going to testify. Testify? About what? The last thing I testified for was a parking ticket. Your testimony could sway the whole trial, Svala said, sounding far too impressed. Humanity's got a stake in this, more than you know. Vex raised a skeptical brow. Now, when you say stake, are we talking literal, or is this some kind of metaphorical stick-up-the-ass thing? A bit of both, Svala shrugged. But mostly it's a keep humanity from getting screwed over kind of thing. Great, Vex thought, just what I needed. High stakes, no instructions, and a side order of existential dread. So what do I need to know? Vex asked, hoping for a quick crash course in not dying. Svala tapped a translucent screen that appeared from thin air, lists of alien species and their grievances flitting by faster than a politician changing promises. You'll meet the Galactic Council first. They love their pomp and circumstance. Try not to laugh when they introduce themselves. No promises, Vex muttered. Then there are the trials. Think of them as debates, but with more screaming and occasionally a fistfight or two. Basically, Congress with better hair. Vex snorted. Sounds delightful. And finally, there's the testimony. Yours. Humans are new to the council, so you've got the spotlight. Don't trip over your words, or we'll all end up someone's lunch. Vex swallowed hard. No pressure, then. Svala looked him over, eyes narrowing slightly. You might want to clean up first, or not. Might make you look more sympathetic. Sympathetic, right? Vex said. Because nothing says trustworthy like a guy who looks like he lost a fight with a floor. Exactly, Svala said, turning to leave. I'll be back to get you for the council meeting. Try not to die before then. Left alone again, Vex sat back against the wall, trying to catch his breath. He'd gone from potential breakfast on the Shamble to key player in an intergalactic legal drama. Only me, he muttered, rubbing his face. Only bloody me. The door opened again, interrupting his self-pity. A tray slid in, bearing what looked like food if you were generous with your definitions. Vex poked at it with a finger, half expecting it to bite back. Nutrient paste, my favorite, he said, not even trying to hide the sarcasm. As he forced the tasteless goop down, he wondered if anyone on Earth had noticed he was missing. Probably not. Considering his last message home was send help, running low on coffee. An hour later, or maybe just a very long hallucination, Svala returned. Time to meet the council, she said, ushering him through the labyrinthine corridors that somehow managed to smell like a combination of antiseptic and desperation. They entered a vast chamber, filled with representatives from every corner of the galaxy. The noise was deafening, the kind of roar you'd expect at a zoo where the bars just failed. Vex tried not to gawk, but it was hard when confronted with creatures that defied logic and good taste. Members of the council, Svala's voice rang out, instantly silencing the chaos. I present Dr. Kellen Vex, human representative. Vex stepped forward, acutely aware of the eyes or whatever passed for eyes staring at him. Hi, he said, waving awkwardly. Nice to meet you all, or whatever it is we're doing here. A creature resembling a cross between a peacock and an armadillo spoke first. You will testify on behalf of your species, it asked, voice like a rusty hinge. That's what they tell me, Vex replied, though I'm starting to think they might have the wrong guy. A ripple of amusement passed through the chamber, or at least that's what Vex hoped it was. The humans have always been unpredictable. Another voice said, this one emanating from a being made entirely of flickering light. Perhaps you'll surprise us. Surprise is definitely on the table, Vex said, resisting the urge to add as his disappointment, the council leader. An imposing figure who looked like it had stepped out of a nightmare and into a business suit spoke next. The trials begin tomorrow. Prepare your arguments, and remember, the fate of your people could rest on your shoulders. Vex nodded, a smile plastered on his face to hide the panic bubbling beneath. I'll give it my best shot, he said, which in his world meant try not to puke on stage. As Svala led him out, Vex released a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Well, that wasn't so bad, he said, trying to sound upbeat. You did fine, Svala said, though fine seemed to be her default answer for everything. But tomorrow's the real test. Hope you're a quick learner. I've crammed for exams before, Vex replied, trying to convince himself. How much harder can this be? Svala chuckled. Much, but hey, no pressure. Worst case, you'll only have the entire galaxy to blame you. With those soothing words, she left him at his cell, where the nutrient paste awaited like an old friend with no sense of taste. Vex lay back, letting the dull throb of anxiety fill the silence. He was a scientist, not a diplomat. But somehow he'd landed the starring role in a cosmic circus with stakes higher than his last student loan. Just another day in paradise, he muttered, closing his eyes, hoping he'd wake up back on the shamble with nothing worse than a hangover and a new scar. But deep down, he knew this was real, and the next act was about to begin whether he was ready or not, and knowing his luck, probably not, as he drifted towards sleep. Vex couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere, someone was laughing, and it wasn't him. Dr. Kellen Vex was doing what he did best, overthinking while underprepared. The Galactic Arena's cell was now familiar, the floors still cold enough to make his feet feel like frozen peas. He sprawled there, picturing a nice warm bed with a coffee machine attached. But no, he was instead visualizing the odds of his survival, which seemed about as promising as a snowballs in hell. He'd barely had time to contemplate the mess he'd landed in when the cell door slid open. In walked Svala, ever the beacon of unwelcome cheer. Rise and shine, Dr. Vex. Got a special guest for you, she chirped, an irritatingly sunny demeanor clashing with her Undertaker's voice. Can't wait, Vex grumbled, forcing himself up. Another chance to marvel at my own misfortune. You're in luck. It's Kylith, a lawyer, so more misfortune than usual. Svala added with a wink that could only be described as legally suspicious. Kylith followed her in, looking every bit the alien barrister with appendages that probably doubled as rulers for measuring how far up the creek Vex was. The alien's skin shimmered like a disco ball on a bad trip, too bright for an arena more used to shadows. Doctor, Vex pleasure, Kylith said, voice like gravel being sweet-talked by a jackhammer. If you're here to help, I'm all ears. And if you're here to bury me, stand in line, Vex replied, holding out a hand he hoped wouldn't be bitten off. Kylith chuckled, a noise somewhere between a death rattle and a laugh. Your presence here has the council in a tizzy. You're like the wild card in a game of galactic poker, and no one knows if you're bluffing or just plain lost. Well, I do have a habit of stumbling into games I can't win, Vex admitted. So what's the deal with this trial? Svala mentioned something about humanity having a stake, or was it stake? Both sound pretty ominous. Kylith leaned in, lowering their voice as if the walls had ears, which wouldn't have surprised Vex in the slightest. The trial is more than just a courtroom drama, Doctor. It's a battleground. Each race argues their case, with resources and territory up for grabs. Think of it as a cosmic brawl, but with more paperwork and less blood. Sounds about as fun as an audit. What's humanity's angle? Vex asked, trying to mask his anxiety with bravado, like a kid bluffing his way through a haunted house. You're new, which makes you an unknown entity. The Council's factions are split on whether you're a threat or an advantage. Kylith explained, their many eyes narrowing as if sizing up a particularly slippery eel. Some want you to succeed, open new alliances, share technology. Others see you as a threat. A reminder of how unpredictable humans can be. Vex scratched his head, trying to absorb the stakes without a migraine. So, I'm both the solution and the problem. Typical. Exactly. The stakes are high, Doctor. Your testimony could tip the balance. Or it could tip you into an early grave, Kylith said, the last part delivered with a smile that lacked any warmth. No pressure then, Vex muttered, crossing his arms. Any tips on not getting eaten alive, metaphorically or otherwise? Kylith grinned, baring teeth that belonged in a dentist's horror story. Be honest, be clever, and for the love of all things sane, try not to insult anyone important. It's like a first date with the galaxy's most dysfunctional family. Vex rubbed his temples, a gesture that had become second nature since his impromptu tour of space's least appealing destinations. I'll do my best, but if things go south, I'm blaming you. Kylith gave a nod that might have passed as respectful or was simply an involuntary twitch. I wouldn't expect anything less. As Kylith exited, Vex glanced at Svala, who was lingering by the door, looking like she had more to say. I hope you're enjoying my slow descent into madness, he quipped, only half joking. Svala shrugged, a fluid motion that seemed almost practiced. I've seen worse descents. Besides, everyone loves an underdog, right? Yeah, until they trip over their own shoelaces and faceplant. Vex replied, but couldn't help a small grin. So what's the plan? You babysitting me all the way through this? She considered him with a look that was half amused, half sympathetic, a terrible mix if he ever saw one. Think of me as your therapist with slightly less empathy and a penchant for sarcasm. We'll get through this one disaster at a time. Vex sighed, the kind that came from the depths of a weary soul. Great, so what's next? More fun galactic politics, or do I get the evening off to relax by the pool? More like a pool of piranhas, Svala replied, deadpan. But first you meet the other representatives. You're going to love them, or at least they'll love to hate you. Vex nodded, resigned to his fate. Lead the way then, let's go make some friends. With that, Svala led him through a series of corridors that seemed designed by an architect with a grudge against straight lines. Vex marveled at the ever-present hum of technology, punctuated by the occasional flicker of lights that suggested someone hadn't paid the electricity bill. The meeting hall they arrived at was less intimidating than the council chamber, but somehow more unsettling. The representatives were scattered around, eyeing Vex like a curiosity they couldn't quite classify, a zoo animal that had escaped into the gift shop. Everyone, this is Dr. Kellen Vex, our human wildcard, Svala announced, with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for introducing someone about to bungee jump without a rope. There was a murmur of acknowledgement, though not exactly welcoming. Vex felt the weight of their stares and resisted the urge to hide behind Svala, who seemed completely at ease in the spotlight. Dr. Vex, a voice boomed, and Vex turned to see a creature that resembled a sentient cactus with a strong grip on diplomacy. I am Ambassador Thrax of the Crystali delegation. A pleasure, I'm sure. Likewise, Vex replied, trying to match the ambassador's enthusiasm without sounding like he was on a game show. You've got quite the setup here. Thrax's many appendages wiggled in what might have been a shrug. Ah, the arena is a marvel of engineering indeed, but it's the people that make it truly unique. Vex nodded, feeling immensely out of his depth. So, any tips for surviving this political minefield? The ambassador chuckled, a sound like wind through a desert. Speak softly, carry a big stick, and try not to poke anyone important with it. Solid advice, Vex said, internally wondering if he could get away with carrying an actual stick, something to wave around when things got dicey. As the crowd began to disperse, Thrax leaned in slightly. Keep your wits about you, Dr. Vex. The trial may seem like a spectacle, but it's a deadly serious one. The galaxy is watching, and they are all eager to see what you humans are truly made of. Vex resisted the urge to crack a joke about being made of mostly coffee and bad decisions. Instead, he simply nodded, absorbing the weight of the task ahead. I'll do my best. Svala, who'd been observing silently, gestured for Vex to follow her back to their quarters, leaving the chaotic buzz of the hall behind. As they walked, Vex couldn't help but wonder how he'd ended up as humanity's spokesman in the galaxy's most awkward family meeting. Feeling overwhelmed yet? Svala asked, breaking the silence with her trademark dry wit. Overwhelmed, undercaffeinated, and slightly nauseous, Vex replied, ticking off each point on his fingers. So you know, just another day at the office. She laughed, a genuine sound that echoed down the corridor. Well, you're doing better than I expected. Most end up curled in a fetal position by now. Nice to know I'm exceeding expectations, Vex said, his wry smile returning. Any other surprises I should brace for? Svala pondered this, her expression thoughtful. Just be ready for anything. The galaxy loves its curveballs, and you, Dr. Vex, are smack in the middle of the game. They reached his cell, and Vex hesitated at the door. Thanks, Svala, for whatever it is you're doing to keep me sane. Just doing my job, Doctor, she replied, her smile small but sincere. Get some rest. Tomorrow might be the day we all find out if you're the galaxy's savior or its punchline. With that, she left him alone, the door sliding shut with a soft hiss. Vex sank onto the unforgiving bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling. He thought about the stakes, the trial, the ridiculousness of his situation, and wondered if maybe, just maybe, he could pull this off. Despite the odds, despite the snickering universe, there was a flicker of hope, and for Kellen Vex, that was enough to keep going. After all, he'd faced worst odds in his life, usually involving caffeine shortages. As sleep crept closer, Vex chuckled at the irony. Just another day in paradise, he murmured, knowing full well that the real trial was yet to begin. But he was ready, or at least ready enough to fake it till he made it. In the silence of his cell, Vex closed his eyes, dreaming of home, of the shamble, and of an endless supply of coffee. A man's got to have priorities, after all. Dr. Kellen Vex had learned two things during his stay at the Galactic Arena. The floors were cold enough to give an ice cube a complex, and his knack for stumbling into trouble was truly cosmic in scale. As he paced his cell, or as he liked to call it, his luxury suite, he brainstormed ways to survive the upcoming trial, preferably without becoming a cautionary tale for future human visitors. His solitude was interrupted by the familiar klaxon of the door sliding open. In strolled Svala, carrying a datapad in the air of someone who had seen it all and was profoundly unimpressed. Morning, Vex, ready for another day of alien diplomacy. Ha, diplomacy is a strong word, Vex replied, eyeing the datapad like it might bite. More like a game of who wants to kill the human today. Svala chuckled. Well, if it's any consolation, you're not the only one with a target on their back. The factions here are all trying to outmaneuver each other. It's like a cosmic version of musical chairs, except the chairs are planets and the music is a death march. Sounds charming. Any updates on whose boots I should be licking to avoid getting the axe? Vex asked, only half joking. She held up the datapad, scrolling through a list of names and faces that seemed to blur together. Let's see. The Crystalli are still on the fence about you. The Zarnabans want you gone yesterday, and the Athari think you're comedy gold but wouldn't mind seeing you squirm. So just another day at the office then, Vex muttered. Any actual advice? Yeah, Svala said, looking up with a hint of mischief in her eyes. Stay unpredictable. They can't decide what to do with you if they can't figure you out. Keep them guessing. Unpredictable, huh? I think I can manage that, Vex said, already hatching a plan that was equal parts brilliant and suicidal. Later, after Svala departed, Vex found himself dragged into a welcome meeting with representatives from each of the major factions. The room, if you could call a dimly lit chamber lined with what looked like oversized dentist chairs a room, was buzzing with a tension that could bend steel. Vex was seated at the head of the table, feeling like the main course at a feast for the wicked. Around him were the assorted ambassadors, each more bizarre than the last. There was Ambassador Thrax, the sentient cactus with a flair for diplomacy, a gelatinous blob from the globulin sector that gurgled ominously, and a particularly stern-looking lizardman from the Zarnaban delegation, whose scales gleamed under the harsh lights. Dr. Vex, Thrax began, his voice carrying the soothing tones of a practiced diplomat. We are eager to hear your thoughts on the upcoming trial. Thoughts, huh? Vex replied, tapping his fingers on the table. Well, I think it's a bit like a soap opera, lots of drama, everyone's got an agenda, and I'm the poor schmuck caught in the middle. There was a ripple of laughter, thin and brittle, like the universe's favorite joke at his expense. Indeed, Thrax said, his appendages waving in what must have been agreement. But you must understand. The stakes here are very real. Resources, territories, lives, no pressure, right? Vex quipped, masking his unease with humor. So what are the odds on me making it out alive? Statistically speaking, the Zarnaban representative hissed, a wicked gleam in his eyes, not great. Well, that's reassuring, Vex said, flashing a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Guess I'll have to improvise. As the meeting droned on, Vex's mind wandered to the advice Svala had given him. Be unpredictable. He needed an edge, something to flip the script and catch these galactic power players off guard. And then it hit him, the one thing he had that they didn't, a deep understanding of human biotechnology. It was time to introduce these aliens to a little Earth ingenuity. Back in his cell, Vex got to work. With limited resources and a mind buzzing with caffeine and desperation, he began cobbling together a makeshift device from the scraps he'd managed to squirrel away. Bits of metal, circuit boards, and whatever else he could scrounge. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. The plan was simple: create a diversion, so a little chaos, and in the ensuing confusion, buy himself some breathing room. It was a long shot, but when you were stuck between a rock and an exploding planet. Long shots were all you had. The next day, as the trial proceedings began, Vex strode into the arena with all the confidence of a man who just remembered he left the oven on. The arena was packed, a sea of alien faces staring down at him from the bleachers like a twisted intergalactic jury. Kyleth was there, seated on the council's dais, their expression unreadable. Vex caught their gaze for a brief moment, a silent exchange of good luck and you're screwed passing between them. He took his place at the center of the arena, the device hidden beneath his jacket. It was time to put his plan into action. As the opening arguments commenced, a tedious affair filled with more grandstanding than substance, Vex bided his time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The device in his pocket felt like a live wire, its potential for mischief both thrilling and terrifying. And then, just as the Zarnaban prosecutor launched into a particularly scathing diatribe against humanity, Vex made his move. With a flick of his wrist, he activated the device, sending a pulse of electromagnetic energy rippling through the arena. The effect was immediate. Lights flickered, displays shorted out, and the hum of technology ground to a halt. Pandemonium erupted as the gathered representatives struggled to make sense of the chaos. What is the meaning of this? Roared the Zarnaban, his voice barely audible over the din. Vex shrugged, adopting an expression of faux innocence. Must be a technical glitch. You know how unreliable these advanced systems can be. Amidst the confusion, Vex seized the opportunity to address the assembly. Ladies and gentlemen, and those of indeterminate taxonomy, I propose a temporary recess. Clearly, there's been a malfunction. Perhaps it's a sign that we should reconsider this trial's approach. His words hung in the air, a challenge and a plea wrapped in one. As the various factions bickered amongst themselves, Vex could see the seeds of doubt taking root. maybe, just maybe, they'd consider a different path. In the midst of the turmoil, Svala sidled up beside him, her expression a mix of admiration and exasperation. "You do realize you've just thrown a wrench into the most important trial in the galaxy, right?" Vex grinned, his heart racing with the thrill of the gamble. "Well, you said to keep them guessing. Besides, what's a little chaos among friends?" She shook her head, but there was a hint of a smile on her lips. "Just be careful, Vex. This is far from over, and there are those who won't take kindly to being outmaneuvered." "I'll keep that in mind," he replied, his mind already racing with possibilities. He'd bought himself some time, a brief reprieve to gather his wits and fortify his position. As the arena gradually settled into a tense standoff, Vex knew he'd be facing a formidable opponent, one who would stop at nothing to ensure humanity's voice was silenced before it could make a difference. Back in his cell, Vex reviewed his mental checklist, plotting his next move. The stakes were higher than ever, and the illusion of safety was just that, an illusion. But he had one thing going for him, the element of surprise. And in this game of cosmic chess, he intended to play every piece to its fullest, even if it meant flipping the board entirely. As he drifted into a restless sleep, Vex wondered if he'd ever get used to this high-stakes game of interstellar politics. Probably not. But then again, who needed comfort when you had adrenaline and a healthy disregard for self-preservation? In the dim quiet of his cell, he chuckled softly to himself. Tomorrow's trial promised to be another roller coaster, and he was in the front seat with the safety bar all but missing. But if he played his cards right, maybe, just maybe, he'd come out on top. Because in the end, it wasn't just his survival on the line, it was humanity's. And if nothing else, Vex was determined to give them a hell of a show. Dr. Kellen Vex woke up with a start, bleary-eyed and groggy, regretting the previous night's attempt to find solace in a cheap bottle of Galactic Gutbuster. The stuff tasted like industrial cleaner and had the aftereffects to match. He sat up, the cold floor of the Galactic Arena cell reminding him just where he was, on the edge of oblivion, with a side order of really bad headaches. The faint hum of alien machinery buzzed in the background, a constant reminder of the delicate balance between life and hostile ejection into the vacuum of space. Vex wondered, not for the first time, if it might be easier just to let the universe have its way with him. But he wasn't quite ready to give up on the joys of oxygen. A sharp knock on the cell door interrupted his morose musings. It was Svala, her expression as unimpressed as ever. "Rise and shine, Vex, we've got a situation." "Do I ever get a day without a situation?" Vex grumbled, his voice a gravelly testament to last night's liquid decisions. "Not if you want to keep your head attached," Svala replied dryly, tapping the datapad she always had in hand like it was a magic wand that could summon trouble at will. "Word's out that some factions are gunning for you, hard. Gunning for me." "That's new," Vex muttered sarcastically, dragging himself to his feet. "So what do I have to look forward to today? Assassination attempts, sabotage, or the good old-fashioned smear campaign?" She gave him a look that was almost amused. "All of the above, actually. But don't worry, you've got some unlikely friends willing to lend a hand." "Unlikely friends? Is this where you tell me the sentient cactus has a soft spot for me?" Vex quipped, pulling on his jacket. "Better," she said, handing him a small device that looked like a cross between a slug and a gummy bear. "Meet Tura. She's a symbiotic alien with a knack for making things interesting." "In what possible universe is this better?" Vex asked, eyeing the squirming thing. "And what does interesting mean?" "Means she can help you fend off those who want you dead. Plus, she's got a great sense of humor. You'll love her," Svala said, not bothering to hide the smirk. "Great. Because what I've always wanted is a symbiotic sidekick with jokes," Vex sighed, hesitantly reaching for Tura, who emitted a faintly amused hum. As Tura attached herself to his arm, Vex felt a strange sensation, like his flesh was being tickled by tiny electric fingers. "Well, this is awkward," he muttered. "Awkward but necessary." Tura's voice whispered directly into his mind, surprising him with the clarity and warmth of it. "I'll do my best to keep you alive. Plus, I've always wanted to be part of a good conspiracy." "Fantastic," he thought back, trying to wrap his head around the fact he now had a voice in his head with a penchant for conspiracy. "Let's make this a partnership for the ages. Or until one of us dies in a fiery explosion," Tura replied cheerfully. Before Vex could ponder the delightful optimism of his new companion, Svala cleared her throat. "So, what's the plan?" "The plan," Vex said, feeling slightly more confident with reinforcements, however strange in place, "is to unravel who's behind the assassination orders and why. Maybe even get them to call off their hitmen before one of them succeeds." "A tall order," Svala noted, but there was a flicker of trust in her eyes. Something Vex wasn't sure he'd seen before. "But if anyone can pull it off, it's you. Just try not to die." "No promises," Vex grinned, adrenaline starting to push aside the hangover. "Let's get to work." The Galactic Arena was more crowded than usual, the halls buzzing with a mix of power brokers, schemers, and those just looking to sell hats made from authentic human hair. Vex navigated through the throng, feeling every pair of alien eyes weighing him like a butcher assessing livestock. Kylith, his alien lawyer and supposed ally, had managed to arrange a discreet meeting with a contact who claimed to have intel on the factions conspiring against him. Vex suspected this meeting would either lead to salvation or land him deeper in hot water. Odds were about even. In a dim corner of the arena's marketplace, past the stalls selling everything from space fruit to questionable souvenirs, Vex found the contact, an insectoid creature with compound eyes and a voice like grating metal. "You Vex," it rasped, antennae twitching as if testing the air for lies. "That's me. I hear you've got information," Vex replied, trying not to visibly recoil from the creature's acrid scent. "Who wants me dead today?" "Everyone. But I guess you already knew that," the insectoid chuckled, a sound like nails on a chalkboard. "Specifically, though, the Crystalli are leading the charge. They've got a new partner, someone inside the arena." "Inside?" Vex frowned. "Why would anyone inside want me gone?" "Politics, power, profit. Same reasons anyone does anything," the insectoid replied, its mandibles clicking thoughtfully. "But it's not just the Crystalli. The Zarnabin are in on it too, and they've been getting cozy with some of the arena security." "So, a conspiracy within a conspiracy," Vex muttered. "This just keeps getting better. Watch your back, human. Friends are few and far between here," the insectoid said, fixing Vex with a look that might have been pity. "Even the ones who seem like allies." "Thanks for the vote of confidence," Vex replied, slipping the creature a small credit chip. "I'll keep that in mind." With more questions than answers, Vex left the meeting feeling like he was standing on the edge of a precipice, the ground crumbling beneath his feet. He needed a plan, a real one, not just improvising from one disaster to the next. Back in his cell, Vex pondered his next move, Tura silently observing through their link. It was a peculiar sensation, having another consciousness riding shotgun in his mind, but he was starting to appreciate her presence. Maybe he was getting used to this brand of insanity. "So, what's the angle, boss?" Tura's voice whispered, laced with curiosity and a touch of mischief. "We need to flush out whoever's coordinating these attacks from the inside," Vex replied, rubbing his temples. "Shake the tree and see what falls out. And how do you propose to do that? Besides, the usual luck-fueled chaos. Leverage. We find out who stands to gain the most from my absence and turn the tables on them," Vex said grimly. "Problem is, I'm not exactly swimming in allies here." "Lucky for you, I know someone who might be able to help," Tura chimed in. "An old friend, not the most reliable, but they owe me a favor." "Care to elaborate?" Vex asked, intrigued despite himself. "They call him Scrap, a scavenger. Knows the underbelly of this place better than most. If anyone can dig up dirt on your enemies, it's him." "You think he's trustworthy?" Vex asked, half expecting Tura to burst into laughter. "About as trustworthy as a black hole during a power outage," Tura admitted. "But desperate times and all that." "Desperation is my middle name," Vex said, already resigned to the madness of the plan. "Let's pay this Scrap a visit." Finding Scrap was an exercise in patience and colorful profanity. The scavenger operated out of one of the arena's sublevels, an area populated by those elusive souls who preferred shadow to light and anonymity to fame. Vex descended into the dimly lit corridors, his senses on high alert. The smell of burnt circuitry and stale air permeated the space, a stark contrast to the opulence above. He found Scrap's den nestled between a dubious-looking eatery and a vendor hawking genuine Earth memorabilia. Scrap himself was a wiry human with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow and a gleam in his eyes that screamed opportunist. His domain was cluttered with an assortment of gadgets, bits of metal, and things Vex couldn't quite identify without risking an allergic reaction. "Vex, my man," Scrap greeted him with an enthusiasm that set Vex's nerves on edge. "Tura said you'd be by. What can old Scrap do for you?" "I need information. Someone inside the arena is trying to kill me, and I need to know who," Vex said, cutting to the chase. "Ah, the old who wants me dead game," Scrap chuckled. "Classic. Lucky for you, I've got ears in all the right places. But information ain't cheap. Name your price," Vex said, knowing full well Scrap would make him regret those words. Straight to the point. "I like it," Scrap grinned. "I need a little favor. There's a shipment coming in, something I've been eager to get my hands on. Help me acquire it, and I'll give you what you need." "And by acquire, you mean?" Vex asked, though he already knew the answer. "Liberate, borrow, Rahome, you get the idea," Scrap replied, winking conspiratorially. Vex sighed, the weight of his predicament settling on his shoulders like a leaden cloak. "Fine, but this better be worth it." "Oh, it will be," Scrap assured him, rubbing his hands together in anticipation. "Meet me tonight, and we'll make some magic happen." Vex left Scrap's den with a familiar sense of impending doom. It seemed his life was destined to be a series of risky bargains and desperate gambits. But if it got him closer to the truth, he had no choice but to play the game. Back in the confines of his cell, Vex tried to rest, the upcoming night promising a fresh whirlwind of chaos. He could only hope that amidst the tumult, he'd find a thread to pull that would unravel the web of intrigue threatening to strangle him. As he waited for night to fall, he found a grim sort of comfort in the realization that in a universe teeming with uncertainty, at least he knew one thing: tomorrow would be another day of interstellar craziness. And for Vex, that was just another Tuesday. Dr. Kellen Vex awoke to the familiar chill of the Galactic Arena cell's floor biting into his back. nothing like the sensation of ice and existential dread to shake off the cobwebs of sleep. As he sat up, groaning like a rusty hinge, he noted that the state of his cell had not improved overnight. Still the same depressing shade of gray on gray with a hint of grunge, a prison decorator's dream. Morning sunshine, Tura chirped cheerfully in his mind. Ready to face another day of everyone wanting you dead. Can't wait, Vex grumbled, rubbing the sleep from his eyes as he tried to ignore the persistent throbbing in his temples. I'm starting to think my life choices might need some reevaluation. Ah, reflection. The first step toward doing nothing about it, Tura quipped, an electric tickle of amusement spreading through his arm. Vex stood up and stretched, contemplating the irony of a man with a doctorate being stuck in a situation that required more street smarts than academia. He needed to escape, signal for help, or at least figure out how to not die in the next 24 hours. Small goals manageable. First order of business, resources, or the distinct lack thereof. His inventory consisted of a datapad with about as much charge as a politician's promise and a symbiotic alien who doubled as his comedy sidekick. It was going to be a tight squeeze, but like squeezing blood from a stone, Vex figured necessity might just be the mother of inventive skullduggery. Any bright ideas? He asked Tura, more out of habit than hope. I'm here for moral support and bad jokes, remember, Tura replied. But if we're getting serious, let's talk biology. I'm listening, Vex said warily. Human biology, to be specific. You've got what, 37 trillion cells? Surely there's something in that biological toolkit of yours that can improvise. Right, and my degree in xenobiology makes me an expert on genetic MacGyvering, Vex muttered, but he couldn't deny the logic. If he was going to MacGyver his way out of here, he might as well start with the only tool at his disposal, his body. All right, let's think. Chemicals, reactions, that sort of thing, Vex said, pacing the confines of his cell as ideas churned sluggishly like molasses in his brain. What do I have? Sweat, saliva, stomach acids. Getting hotter, Tura encouraged. And by hotter, I mean warmer. Vex stopped pacing, his mind latching onto an idea like a drowning man to a life raft. Sweat and stomach acid. Maybe I can create a corrosive compound. That's the spirit, Tura said. Nothing says innovative escape plan like a bachelor's degree level understanding of acid-base reactions. Ignoring the sarcasm, Vex got to work. He collected sweat from his forehead. It wasn't like the cell was air-conditioned, and then attempted the delicate operation of extracting stomach acid without making himself throw up. Not exactly a culinary masterpiece, but he wasn't aiming for flavor. What are you, Vex, the Walter White of biological substances? Tura jibed. More like a desperate man with a death wish, Vex replied, carefully mixing the compounds in a discarded container that had previously held an unidentifiable green mush. If this didn't work, at least his captors might let him die with the consolation prize of a Darwin Award. After a few minutes of mixing and a silent prayer to whichever deity might still care, Vex applied his homemade concoction to the cell door's lock. The acrid smell was potent, but he focused on the small mercies, like the fact that he hadn't managed to poison himself yet. Now we wait, Vex said, stepping back to admire his potential handiwork. What do you think our chances are? Optimistically, about the same odds as a snowball in hell, Tura answered breezily. But that's better than nothing. As the minutes ticked by, Vex felt the tension ratchet up a notch with every second. The acid was eating away at the lock slowly, agonizingly slowly. Patience, Vex reminded himself, was a virtue, not one he'd ever been particularly fond of, but a virtue nonetheless. Eventually, the lock gave a pitiful click, the sound of small triumphs. Vex pushed the door open a crack, peering out into the corridor. Empty. But there was no telling how long that would last. Now was as good a time as any to make his move. All right, Tura, let's hope your friend Scrap is as resourceful as you claimed, Vex said, slipping into the corridor and making his way toward the sublevels. Because I'm running on fumes here. Don't worry, Tura replied. Scrap's a survivor. If anyone's got an escape plan, it's him. Confidence, I like it. Blind faith might be our new strategy, Vex whispered, navigating the shadows with a mix of caution and reckless abandon. The galactic arena was a sprawling maze of bureaucracy and cold steel, but it had its hidden nooks and crannies known only to those who, like Vex, had nothing left to lose. The journey to Scrap's turf was uneventful, an unsettling development that left Vex more on edge than he cared to admit. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that the walls had ears, eyes, and possibly sharp, pointy teeth. Scrap was in his usual haunt, surrounded by a menagerie of mismatched technology that would give any self-respecting engineer nightmares. He looked up from his work, grinning like a cat that had just swallowed a particularly delicious canary. Vex, didn't expect to see you so soon, Scrap said, setting down a tool that looked suspiciously like a repurposed laser scalpel. I assume you're here cause of our little arrangement. You assume correctly, Vex replied, trying to ignore the persistent itch of paranoia at the back of his neck. I need that information, Scrap, badly. Scrap stood, his wiry frame barely concealed by the layers of jackets and gadgets he wore. And I need that shipment. It's coming in tonight, but security's tight. We'll need a diversion. Let me guess, I'm the diversion, Vex asked dryly. Well, you are the most wanted man in this sector, Scrap said with a shrug. Might as well put that notoriety to good use. Fine, Vex agreed, knowing full well he didn't have much choice. What's the plan? Scrap outlined a scheme that was 1 part cunning, 2 parts insanity, and the rest sheer audacity. It involved setting off a few well-placed fireworks in the form of improvised explosives, courtesy of Scrap's dubious engineering prowess. While security was busy playing hero, Vex would slip in and retrieve the package. Piece of cake. Scrap finished, looking far too pleased with himself. If by cake you mean potential fiery death, then sure, Vex replied. Let's hope your fireworks pack a punch. You'll be amazed, Scrap assured him with a wink. And if it doesn't work, hey, at least you'll go out with a bang. Comforting thought, Vex said, checking his makeshift watch, a relic from Earth, battered but reliable. Let's get this over with. As the operation kicked off, Vex couldn't help but marvel at the absurdity of his situation. Here he was, risking life and limb in a space station full of intergalactic power players, using a plan that hinged on the competence of a scavenger with a loose grip on morality. But then, when had his life been anything besides a series of increasingly ridiculous escapades? The diversion, predictably, turned out to be a roaring success, or a roaring disaster, depending on perspective. Scrap's devices went off with a series of deafening pops and flashes, sending arena security scrambling like ants from a kicked anthill. While chaos reigned, Vex slipped into the restricted area, feeling the adrenaline spike in his veins. The package was there, tucked away in a nondescript crate, as unassuming as a spork at a 5-star restaurant. He grabbed it and made his retreat, the weight of impending doom ever present at his back. Back in Scrap's den. The scavenger's eyes lit up as Vex handed over the package. Beautiful work, Vex. I knew you were the man for the job. Yeah, Vex said, waving off the praise. Now spill. Who's gunning for me, Scrap? Scrap opened the package, his fingers moving with the precision of a surgeon. Inside was an array of data chips, which he quickly scanned. Looks like you've pissed off quite a few players, Vex, but the biggest fish, the arena's head of operations, seems they've got a vested interest in seeing you out of the picture. Of course, the people running the show, Vex muttered. I should have guessed. Anyone else? A few others in the mix, but nothing compared to that, Scrap said, handing Vex a chip loaded with the intel. This is the key to your freedom, my friend. Use it wisely. Thanks, Scrap, Vex said, pocketing the chip and feeling the faint stirrings of hope. I owe you one. Just keep making things interesting, Vex, Scrap replied with a grin. Life's too boring otherwise. As Vex left Scrap's hideout, he couldn't shake the feeling that his luck might finally be turning. He had information, a semblance of a plan, and an undeniable urge to throw a wrench into the well-oiled machine of his enemies. But first things first, he needed to get out of the arena alive. Easier said than done, but Vex had always been fond of impossible odds. After all, what was life without a little danger? Onward and upward, Vex. Tura's voice echoed in his mind, the familiar humor a comforting constant. Let's see how deep this rabbit hole goes. Lead the way, Tura, Vex replied, feeling a strange sense of camaraderie with his alien hitchhiker. I have a feeling things are about to get interesting. Dr. Kellen Vex was a man on a mission, and that mission was to not get blown to bits while executing a plan that even he thought was more than a little insane. The Galactic Arena was a sprawling complex of corridors and half-functional tech, most of which served as the setting for his grand escape. The stink of Scrap's makeshift explosives still clung to his clothes, a charming reminder of the death-defying stunt he just pulled off. The path to the courtroom wasn't exactly a leisurely stroll, more of a frantic dash against time with all the grace of a headless chicken. He hugged the shadows, moving with the cautious urgency of a man who knew a dozen factions would love nothing more than to see his head on a spike, or perhaps just floating in space, which was arguably worse. Vex, you've got the grace of a drunken bumblebee on roller skates, Tura quipped in his mind. Gee, thanks. If I survive this, I'm putting that on my resume, Vex muttered, sidestepping a patrolling droid with all the smoothness of a cat burglar. Not that he had much choice. The arena's security measures were about as welcoming as a tax audit. The corridors twisted and turned in mind-numbing patterns, each more identical than the last. Vex was tempted to leave a trail of breadcrumbs, not that there were any breadcrumbs to be had, unless you counted the crumbling remains of his dignity. Svala, his trusty informant of bitter truths, hadn't been wrong about the layout of the arena. It's like they designed this place specifically to make people lose their minds, she'd said, and Vex was beginning to see the method in the madness. His path was a blend of luck, educated guesses, and the kind of intuition that came from being constantly on the brink of disaster. Every metallic clang, every hiss of steam was a potential herald of doom. Not that Vex was paranoid or anything. No, definitely not. Just really, really cautious. The courtroom itself was situated at the heart of the arena, a fact which Vex found as charming as a root canal. But then, why make anything easy for the poor souls dragged there for judgment? As he approached, he caught the low murmur of voices, too far away to make out the words, but close enough to remind him that time was slipping away like sand through a sieve. All right, Tura, how are we doing on time? Vex asked, checking his watch as if expecting it to suddenly reveal the secrets of the universe. You've got maybe an hour before the trial starts. Plenty of time to make it there, assuming you don't trip over your own feet, Tira replied, the humor in the alien's voice doing little to ease Vex's nerves. Good to know, he said dryly, edging closer to the main corridor leading to the courtroom. The scent of antiseptic and metal hung heavy in the air, a not-so-subtle reminder that this was a place where lives were dissected and judged. And if Vex didn't play his cards right, he'd be next on the chopping block. He slipped into the corridor with all the grace of a professional liar, quick, silent, and with a vague sense of impending doom. A pair of guards loitered near the entrance, their attention focused on a datapad that seemed to be malfunctioning in the most entertaining way possible. Guess the arena's tech budget didn't stretch to functional datapads, Vex whispered to himself, taking advantage of their distraction to sneak past with all the skill of a man who'd spent more time evading responsibility than he cared to admit. The courtroom loomed ahead, an imposing edifice of cold steel and bad decisions. Vex paused at the entrance, taking a moment to catch his breath and remind himself that he was doing this not just for himself, but for something far greater. Or at least that's what he liked to tell himself when things got particularly grim. Inside, the room was a hive of activity. Representatives from various factions milled about, their expressions a mix of boredom and thinly veiled hostility. The council sat at the head, a panel of beings whose combined wisdom was rivaled only by their collective disdain for anyone who dared to challenge their authority. Looks like we're the entertainment for the day, Chira said, a touch of amusement coloring his mental voice. Let's hope they don't throw tomatoes, Vex replied, taking his place at the defense stand. The weight of the data chip in his pocket was a comforting reminder of the ace up his sleeve. Kylith, his shimmering alien lawyer, appeared at his side, resplendent and unreadable as ever. Vex, just the man of the hour, ready to play the role of humanity's last hope. More or less, Vex said, offering a smile that was more grimace than anything else. You got my back right. Like a barnacle on a ship, Kylith replied smoothly. Let's make this quick and painless. Too late for that, Vex muttered as the proceedings began, the council opening with a speech that was long on rhetoric and short on substance. Not that he'd expected anything less. Prosecutor, a slimy creature resembling a cross between a slug and a particularly unpleasant politician, was quick to launch into accusations. According to them, Vex was responsible for everything from intergalactic espionage to the decline in cupcake sales, though the last one was probably just an oversight on the prosecution's part. How do you plead? The chairperson asked, their voice booming and authoritative. Not guilty, Vex said, channeling his inner actor. I mean, who has the time for intergalactic espionage these days? The room erupted in murmurs, the very fabric of the courtroom vibrating with the potential for chaos. Vex could almost taste the tension in the air, a mix of acrid fear and simmering anger. Vex, if you've got something to say, now's the time, Kylith whispered, his voice a low murmur in Vex's ear. Don't worry, I've got this, Vex replied, pulling the data chip from his pocket with a flourish that would have made any stage magician proud. Ladies and gentlemen of the council, I present evidence that may just clear my name. He handed the chip to Kylith, who swiftly began the process of uploading its contents to the main display. The room fell silent, anticipation hanging thick in the air as the data began to unravel the tangled web of deceit that had ensnared him. The evidence was damning, but not for Vex. No, the real culprits were the very beings who'd put him on trial in the first place, their dirty dealings laid bare for all to see. It was a veritable Pandora's box of corruption and greed, and Vex reveled in the chaos of it all. The council's reaction was immediate and predictable: outrage, denial, and more than a little panic. Vex watched as the room descended into a frenzy, chaos reigning supreme as factions turned on one another in a dance of betrayal and blame. Vex, you've done it now, Tira said, sounding more impressed than concerned. You've managed to piss off the entire council in one fell swoop. Bravo, yeah, well, I aim to please, Vex replied, watching the fallout with a mix of satisfaction and trepidation. The trial had taken a turn he hadn't quite anticipated, but that was par for the course in his life. As the council scrambled to regain control, Vex allowed himself a moment of triumph. He'd come a long way from the cold, gray walls of his cell, and while he had no illusions about the road ahead, he at least had the satisfaction of knowing he'd thrown one hell of a wrench into the works. Now what, Vex? Kylith asked, his expression as inscrutable as ever. Now, Vex said, with a grin that was part challenge, part exhilaration, we see how deep this rabbit hole goes. With that, they stepped out of the courtroom and into the fray, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead with the kind of reckless abandon that only someone with nothing left to lose could muster. The stakes were high, the odds stacked against him, but that was just how Vex liked it. After all, what was life without a little chaos, Doctor? Kellen Vex had always considered himself a man of science, not a man of conflict. But here he was, at the center of a galactic legal maelstrom, fending off accusations that could make even the most seasoned lawyer break into a cold sweat. Luck, or perhaps some twisted sense of cosmic irony, had led him to this moment. The courtroom buzzed like a hive of particularly irritable bees, each faction representative itching to make their sting. His lawyer, Kyleth, radiated an eerie calm. Whether it was a genuine trait or simply a byproduct of his alien physiology was anyone's guess. Kyleth turned to Vex, his shimmering form catching the harsh overhead lights, and whispered, "Ready to save humanity or at least yourself." "Always," Vex replied, the word tasting like rust and determination on his tongue. The prosecutor, looking more like a slug someone had mistakenly taught to speak than anything else, was currently halfway through a diatribe that Vex was sure would be a bestseller in the things no one cares about genre. Vex's datapad beeped pitifully, reminding him it had about as much life left as a politician's promise. "Vex, if boredom was a weapon, we'd be dead by now," Tira quipped inside his head. "You might want to wake them up before they fall asleep and forget to convict you." "Good point," Vex thought back, barely avoiding a mental eye roll. "Dr. Kellen Vex," the slug droned, stretching Vex's name like an unpleasant piece of taffy. "How do you respond to these grave charges of espionage, conspiracy, and general tomfoolery?" Vex cleared his throat, a sound that echoed ominously in the expectant silence of the courtroom. "Well," he began, using his best "I'm definitely not guilty" voice, "I might be guilty of tomfoolery, but I'm innocent of everything else. And to prove it, I have something very special for you all." That got their attention. The room shifted, eyes focusing on him with the intensity of 1,000 suns, or at least the heat of a malfunctioning space heater. "Just what are you implying, Dr. Vex?" the chairperson asked, their voice a curious mix of suspicion and intrigue. "Implying? Oh, I'm not implying anything," Vex replied, pulling out the data chip with a flourish that would make a magician weep. "I'm outright stating that the real villains are sitting right in this room." He handed the chip to Kyleth, who slipped it into a slot with the ease of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, or at least had watched enough courtroom dramas to fake it convincingly. The holographic display whirred to life, projecting a series of damning documents, messages, and video snippets that painted a picture of corruption and betrayal that would make a soap opera seem dull. "What you're seeing," Vex continued, "is evidence of a conspiracy so vast, so deeply entrenched in our society, it makes the black market look like a lemonade stand." The room erupted in chaos, the air thick with outrage, denial, and more than a few muttered curses. Vex could almost taste the pandemonium, a flavor somewhere between burnt coffee and the sweet satisfaction of a plan well executed. "Vex, you've really done it this time," Tira remarked, sounding more impressed than worried. "You've managed to piss off every important person in the room." "Yes, well, if you're not making enemies, you're not doing it right," Vex replied. The council members were now frantically whispering among themselves, their expressions ranging from shock to anger to something that could have been indigestion. The prosecutor, meanwhile, seemed to be experiencing a full-body meltdown, his gelatinous form quivering like a particularly nervous blob of jello. "Order, order in the courtroom," the chairperson bellowed, slamming a gavel down with enough force to make the whole room jump in unison. "This is highly irregular." "So is a talking slug, but here we are," Vex muttered under his breath, earning a snort of laughter from Kyleth. "Dr. Vex," the chairperson continued, their composure fraying at the edges, "what exactly do you hope to achieve with this spectacle?" "Simple," Vex said, his voice cutting through the clamor like a knife through particularly stubborn butter. "I want the truth, and maybe a nice drink after this is all over, but mostly the truth." Silence fell, heavy and expectant. Vex could see the gears turning in the minds of those assembled, the implications of the evidence sinking in like a particularly unpleasant revelation. Dr. Vex, one of the faction leaders, a gaunt, hawk-faced individual with a penchant for dramatic flair, rose from their seat. "Are you suggesting that the council itself is complicit in these activities?" Vex shrugged, the gesture as casual as it was dangerous. "I'm not suggesting anything, I'm showing there's a difference." The hawk-faced leader sat down heavily, the weight of the revelation settling over the room like a shroud. Vex had the distinct feeling he'd just thrown a live grenade into a very crowded room, and not one with a soft landing zone. "Dr. Vex," Kyleth said, his voice a steady anchor in the storm, "you've turned what could have been a simple conviction into an interstellar incident. What's your next move?" Vex grinned, the expression equal parts defiance and exhilaration. "Survive, maybe have a drink, then figure out what the hell to do with this mess." The murmurs grew louder, the factions already beginning to jostle for position as they recalibrated their alliances in the wake of this new information. Vex watched it all, feeling a curious mix of satisfaction and trepidation. "You've really thrown a wrench in the works," Tira noted, a hint of admiration in their voice. "Yeah, well," Vex thought, "it's not every day you get to crash a party this big." The chairperson, their patience now visibly threadbare, raised a hand for silence. "This council must deliberate. In light of these revelations, we will adjourn to consider the ramifications." Vex watched as the assembled leaders filed out, their expressions a study in grudging respect and simmering animosity. He knew he'd stirred the pot, but whether it would boil over or simmer down was anyone's guess. Kyleth turned to him, his form shimmering with an inscrutable glow. "You've done something remarkable today, Vex. Remarkably stupid or stupidly remarkable?" Vex asked, the ghost of a smirk playing on his lips. "Both," Kyleth replied, a rare smile slipping through his professional facade. As the room emptied, leaving Vex and Kyleth alone in the echoing silence, Vex allowed himself a moment to breathe. The trial wasn't over, not by a long shot, but he'd managed to buy himself time, and in his world, time was the most valuable currency there was. "You've got a real knack for chaos," Tura said, their mental voice surprisingly warm. Vex chuckled, the sound low and rough around the edges. "It's a gift. So, what's the plan now?" Kyleth asked, his expression one of curious patience. "Now," Vex said, a glint of determination in his eyes, "we see just how deep this rabbit hole goes, and maybe, just maybe, we find a way to get humanity out of this mess." The enormity of what he'd set in motion was not lost on him, but that was a worry for another day. Right now he had a fight on his hands, and if there was one thing Vex knew how to do, it was fight. Together they turned and left the courtroom. Stepping back into the labyrinthine corridors of the Galactic Arena, the path ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger and double-crosses, but Vex wouldn't have had it any other way. After all, what fun was life without a little chaos? The door slid shut behind Vex and Kyleth with a groan that could have been the ship expressing its own existential dread. They moved down the corridor, the kind that wound around itself like it was designed to confuse more than guide. The Galactic Arena, where getting lost was just another feature, not a bug. "So," Vex said, letting the word hang like a bad smell, "we kicked the hornet's nest. Now what?" Kyleth, enigmatic as ever, shrugged with a fluid ease, his form shimmered slightly. "We wait for the smoke to clear, see who's left standing." "Great," Vex said. "So either I'm a hero or tomorrow's news. Nice to know." They passed a droid with a face only its designer could love. It whirred, blinked, and did absolutely nothing useful. Standard protocol for arena security. It nodded as if to say, "You're on your own, pal." Inside Vex's head, Tura chuckled. "You could write a book on making friends and influencing interstellar politics. It'd be a hit." "Yeah," Vex shot back mentally. "I'd file it under fiction, or self-help for masochists." The arena's labyrinthine corridors, with their flickering lights and cold metal walls, felt like they were closing in, as if the building itself wanted to squeeze the life out of him, just like everyone else. "You've got that look," Kyleth said, breaking into his spiraling thoughts. "The one that says you're overthinking." "Maybe I am," Vex admitted. "Ever feel like we're just pawns in this, Kyleth?" Kyleth chuckled, a sound like wind through alien trees. "Everyone's a pawn until they decide they're something else." Profound. They stopped at a viewport, the sprawling expanse of the galaxy spreading out before them. Stars twinkling, planets rotating in their orbits, oblivious to the petty dramas unfolding far from their serene paths. The kind of sight that was supposed to put things in perspective, but only served to remind Vex how insignificant their problems were in the grand cosmic scheme. "You ever wonder?" Vex mused. "What's the point of it all?" Kyleth eyed him, the kind of look that suggested he'd lived long enough to hear that question more times than he cared to count. "I find it best not to." "Cryptic," Vex replied, appreciating the irony. He was always drawn to the things that refused to be easily solved. As the silence stretched, Tura piped up, ever the voice of unwanted commentary. "You think too much, Vex. It's going to give you wrinkles, or worse, a conscience." "Maybe," Vex conceded, "but sometimes thinking's all I've got." The moment was broken by a sound that was becoming all too familiar in his life, a shrill alarm, followed by the hurried footsteps of people heading toward the chaos. The aftermath of his revelation was unfolding, each step echoing like the drumbeats of an inevitable conflict. "Should we be worried?" Vex asked, more to himself than anyone. "Worrying is rarely useful," Kyleth said. "Acting is." Good advice for someone who doesn't have an arrest warrant hanging over their head. They continued down the corridor, Vex trying to shake off the sense of foreboding clinging to him like a too small coat. The arena, with its sterile chill and oppressive atmosphere, didn't help. It was like being trapped in a giant fridge, with the added bonus of potential assassination attempts. "Vex," Tura spoke up, "you ever think about leaving this all behind?" "All the time." Vex thought back, but where would I go? Every corner of this universe seems to have my picture plastered with wanted on it. "Ah, the price of popularity. Popularity my ass." Kyleth observed him with a curious tilt of his head. "You look like you're having an argument." "Just thinking." "Ah," Kyleth said, as if that explained everything, which in a way it did. They arrived at the ship bay, the shamble looming like a metallic monster in need of a tetanus shot. Captain Peg, as he was dubbed, was tending to his ship with the kind of affection usually reserved for dying pets or favorite plants. "Captain," Vex called, his voice bouncing off the metal walls. "Is she ready to flee at a moment's notice?" Captain Peg turned, his one good eye narrowing. "She's as ready as she'll ever be, which is to say, probably not." "Good enough for me," Vex said. "Got room for a couple of fugitives." Captain Peg snorted, his laughter as rusty as his ship. "Got room for anything, long as it doesn't eat much and doesn't ask questions." "Perfect." Boarding the shamble felt like stepping into the bowels of a beast, but it was better than being stuck in the arena. At least here, the chaos was his own to manage. Kylith settled into a seat with the practiced ease of someone who knew the value of comfort and the rarity of it in their line of work. So, what's the plan, Vex? Vex looked at him, feeling the weight of his decisions pressing down like a physical force. We find out how much trouble we're in and decide if it's worth fighting through. And if it's not, Vex shrugged, trying to appear more nonchalant than he felt. Then we run, far and fast. Running sounds easy, Tira commented. We both know you can't do that. Maybe not, Vex admitted, but it's nice to pretend. The ship rattled as it took off, shaking like a wet dog trying to dry itself. Vex held onto the armrest, alongside the metaphorical reins of his swiftly galloping life. Once they were hurtling through space, Vex relaxed a little. The arena and its tangled web of deception, lies, and intrigue was behind them for now. Ahead was nothing but the vast stretch of the universe. Indifferent to their fate, so humanity's part in all this, Vex said, breaking the silence. What do you think our legacy will be? Kylith considered the question. Survival, perhaps, adaptability. Humans have a knack for landing in messes and finding their way out. More like falling in head first, Vex corrected, and then pretending it was all part of the plan. Adaptability is a strength, Kylith agreed, a note of admiration in his voice. Not every species can claim that. Yeah, well, adaptability comes from necessity. We've had a lot of practice. The stars outside streaked by, blurring into lines of light that reminded Vex of the train rides he took back on Earth, where the scenery rushed past as if fleeing from him. This was just on a grander scale. You ever think about going back? Tira asked, sounding almost wistful. Back to Earth? Vex thought. Sometimes, but what's there for me now? Nothing, Tira replied. Just like here, but at least it's familiar nothing. True, Kylith stretched, the movement oddly human-like. Whatever happens next, just know that you'll be remembered. Great, Vex said dryly. A footnote in the history of galactic politics. Kylith chuckled. Better a footnote than erased entirely. Vex nodded, conceding the point. We've got to make our mark, even if it's just a stubborn stain. Humans have a talent for that, Kylith remarked. Annoying talent, you mean? Annoyingly effective. The hum of the ship's engines was a steady rhythm. A reminder that they were moving away from disaster towards something else. The unknown was a terrifying and exhilarating prospect. Think we'll end up being the heroes of this story? Vex asked, not entirely serious. Heroes, Kylith raised an eyebrow. In whose eyes? That's the problem, Vex said. Everyone sees things differently. We could be heroes in one story, villains in another. Or both in the same, Tira suggested. Vex smiled, appreciating the irony. Now that's a story I'd like to read. The future was uncertain, the past a tangled mess of regrets and mistakes. But the present, the here and now, was something Vex could hold onto, a lifeline in the swirling chaos of existence. And for now, that was enough.